Okay, all set.
All right. Welcome everyone to the Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start by approval of minutes dated October 22nd, 2020. I move that the minutes from the Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee meeting dated October 22nd, 2020 be approved. Can I get a second?
Second.
Who was that, Marcus?
Yes, it was.
Okay. We got a second by Marcus. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye with the raised hand so I can see everybody's hands. Okay, any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and open up the PowerPoint for this evening.
Can you see it?
Yep, I got it.
Okay.
So the next slide. So the agenda for this evening is we're gonna review the charge statement, purpose and the timeline again. We will go through any sort of update of responses to questions and comments. We will review what we heard from last meeting and do an overview of successful implementation of other school districts of restorative justice. And then we will hear from our MMSD staff on school-based critical response teams. And then we will start making that connection to restorative justice and policy, particularly policy 4147. And then we'll talk about next meeting dates, times, and proposed agenda items. I will have to leave, log off at 6 o'clock for another meeting. And then Savion will take over from there if we're still moving through the agenda. Any questions, concerns, comments? All right, next slide. So again, reviewing our charge of the committee. You know, the committee is charged to examine safety and security options for our high schools related to the removal of SROs out of Madison School District. And the work of the committee will focus on budget and policy recommendations to the board, what needs to be in place when schools reopen, what kind of resources we need to reallocate, and review any and make recommendations regarding current Board of Education policies. Next slide. So here's our timeline. So, you know, obviously August, you know, we've been through September, October, and now we are finding ourselves on November 5th. And I think in the next few slides, we'll talk about sort of the timeline of when we are to report back to the full board on our recommendations. But today we are going to talk about budget and policy recommendations on particularly 4147, review of successful implementation and MMSD grant on the school critical response teams. Next slide. And then again, you know, we go through this at every meeting in really centering us around what we are looking for when we talk about safe and welcoming schools. And our guiding question is, how can the district be more proactive in promoting healthy student behavior, restorative justice philosophies, and equitable school safety and climate. Next slide. So again, so in preparation for the future, our future meetings, I really discuss and review what else do we need to know that will, what else do we need to know, right, to help us provide informed budget policy recommendations to the full board. So November 19th, we'll be discussing budget and policy recommendations, and also December 3rd. So what we heard from our last meeting, I'm going to pass this on to Savion, since he facilitated a great conversation that you had at the last meeting, and to talk about really just recap of what we heard from our last meeting. Savion?
Thank you. Yeah, so we heard a lot of good things last meeting. Presented here.
Oh, you're cutting out.
Oh, okay. I'm going to try and do this. Yeah, so I'll see if it gets stable again. If not, I'll call in on my cell phone. Is this better?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So, passion and commitment from our staff, our community partners, and our students. The importance of ongoing anti-racist teaching and learning from staff and community partners. Just moving on to the desired state, really hammering home that restorative justice is a philosophy, not just an addition for staff to say that they went through, or students to say that they went through, and the importance that students are also, really, and in our schools as well, in terms of what is a healthy and safe school climate. The culture and climate and academics, all those are intertwined, especially how we get students and young people to engage productively in our school system, and what our school system needs to do to be more fair in that to students and be anti-racist in that, and upholding our school system upholding its end of the bargain. We talked about getting families involved, and again, building student capacity and power in this work to grow and have a voice and own the work. So, and just how critical that the community partnerships are. We also talked about, what other districts are doing, or specifically, Denver, Oakland, and I'm blanking on the other one, Minneapolis, have done to fully implement and embrace restorative justice in their school buildings.
Great, thank you, Savion. Anybody else wanna, oh, I'm sorry, Savion, did you have something else?
No, I'm going to call in on my phone, at least for audio, so this doesn't happen again.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that based on our meeting last time?
Yes, I would like to add something.
Sure, Eugenia, go ahead.
Thank you, Gloria. I just wanted to add that that Savion committed the board to take restorative justice training and to set the example to the rest of the school. Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up and reminding us, Eugenia. I think that's a very important component
Thank you.
Of this process. Anybody else? Okay, I'm just scrolling through to see if I have any hands or, okay. All right, next slide. So again, the Q&A document is active. Mark is working through it, and he's working through the responses to the questions, and we'll continue to add to that as we move. Anybody have, Mark, first of all, do you want to add anything to that?
No, there were no questions between last meeting and this meeting.
Okay. So anybody have any questions about that active document that we have going on? Access, Lori, I know, were you able to access it? I know you had a question last time.
Yeah, I found it. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right. I know you guys were all exhausted, right? I mean, I think just emotionally, like physically, I'm just so exhausted. We're all exhausted, a lot going on in our country right now. So, but I do appreciate your continued commitment to show up and be present on this very important discussion. And so let's, sorry, my screen is going everywhere. So then, so we have that, document active, and we'll continue to use it. Next slide. So then Mark Brown sent an email to everybody, and this was Eugenia's resource documents that she sent to us via email at our last meeting about best practices and examples of other schools that have implemented restorative justice in their school districts. And is there, we've asked, I mean, I know it came out late, but if this is an opportunity to share any additional reflections on this document or on this topic. We do want to welcome, is Lana and Rochelle here in the meeting? Gina, were they going to
Yes,
come?
I'm here. I'm here, Gloria. Lana.
Okay, great. They're here to listen and be present for our restorative justice conversations. So just based on what was shared by Eugenia and what's happening in those other school districts, are there any comments, suggestions, anything that we need to highlight as we move forward? Lessons learned from other districts, research on elements of successful implementation. Lori, did you have something?
Go ahead, AU, and I'll go after you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to, mention that the invitation to go deeper in this meeting came super late. And so we never got the chance to confirm to Bryn that we're going to be able to do this. And that would be great if we could. And Bryn said that we were going to be able to get that time the following meeting. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that, that's one thing. Yeah.
Okay.
That.
What? I'm sorry.
And that Bryn told us that we were going to be able to have the opportunity on the following meeting, since the ask came super late, and then we didn't confirm. And then, the other thing that I wanted to add, and please everybody else jump in, is that there are some things that are like consistent within these models, and that are the redirection of funding, like real funding, not just like in pockets, but real funding, the community partnerships, and with the community organization, with grassroots organizations, the change in policy, also resolutions that came from the board, changing in policy. And one last thing, but I think that I will just open it up for the rest of the group to share, but those things are very very important, that have been consistent in all those models.
Eugenia, yeah, that's helpful. And I just have a question. Redirecting of funding, was that redirecting of funding internally in how we invest restorative justice internally, or is this redirecting of funding to our community partnerships?
Yeah. So Lana, I don't know if you would like to jump in, since you have been going to Minnesota and a lot, so.
Sure, yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. And we would also be happy to provide, I've started compiling a document that has more, even more detail that I would be happy to share at some point. A lot of so the three districts that I am the most aware of are St. Paul and Oakland and Denver. And from what I know from those, a lot of the initial resources come from grant funding, large multi-million-dollar grants often. And then, that tends to be the way that it's started, and they're looking at kind of pilot programs. And then over time, some of those resources are allocated from the district and other kinds of ways, but often it's large grants to start out.
Where are the grants coming from, Lana? Like, are they federal
So,
grants?
St. Paul's initial grant was from NEA, National Education Association. Colorado, Denver had some state grants. I'm not sure, I don't know more specifically than that. Oakland, I don't know, the finer details. I know they had some grants from the city, and I'm sure some other places as well. I don't know the specifics of that.
Mm-hmm. Have we ever applied for, have we ever participated in a grant funding process for this work?
No, we have not on a large scale. We've kind of had our eyes open for something that would feel right, but we have not done that to this point. I think that would be a great step. Yep.
Yeah. Any other?
Were those grants tied to reducing disparities in terms of suspensions and expulsions?
What I know about Colorado, their RJ work in Denver started in 2006. And I think it was around that same time when there were some state level legislation specifically attached to reducing exclusionary zero tolerance discipline in schools. And so Denver's work, it's my understanding that Denver's work started kind of at that responsive, like specifically attached to that. And then over time grew to be more proactive as well.
One thing that I'll share too about that is that, similar to what AU was talking about in terms of themes through all of them are resources, community partnership, policy, time and training, like significant large scale investment in capacity building for people inside and outside of the schools. And then also it's like a 3 to 5 year time range in terms of when you shift for the full school. So that's something to share. And also in looking at specifically like Oakland, for example, they do like 80% proactive restorative justice work and only like 20% is in response to something. So I really would encourage us all to really move away from focusing specifically on response and look at like, it's way more proactive work that needs to happen.
I would also just add that and I know that we're not meant to have a deep conversation today, and we can certainly come back to this in a couple of weeks if that makes sense. But there's a policy brief that was published, I think, in January of this year, where they were looking at programs in schools all over the country. And at the end of that document, they identify what they call misimplementation models. So things that they've learned about what has worked and what hasn't worked in other districts. And some of the things that AU and Lori are talking about are identified there. So that's another resource that we can share and use.
Thanks, Lana, for bringing that up. I think, that's sort of my whole, as I'm thinking about, as we're moving to expand, have we done an assessment of what we're doing and identify gaps, opportunities for improvement? Have we ever done anything like that? Because I guess as we are moving to expand, I don't want to expand on something that's not working, right? So wondering if we've done that.
Yeah. So, this is not exactly about only looking at the district, but we are engaging in an evaluation of restorative justice in Dane County. and really looking at in partnership with Ubuntu, and from a grant that we got in partnership with Time Bank and in Berry Patch, actually. So this is a piece that is actually looking at evaluation of restorative justice work. It's looking at different models, doing focus groups with youth. Actually, right now is the stage where they are at. So there is some kind of evaluation that is going on, but not as intensive as like really looking at the district as, you know, as an institution. And yeah, but there is something happening.
Yeah, thanks, Eugenia. Yeah, so I think, you know, that is part of it, right? And I'm hoping that as we move forward, that is part of the process. And like what you're talking about, right, is, you know, lessons learned and from, you know, what other districts have been doing. And, you know, really evaluating ourselves. Patrice, did you have something?
Yeah, can I just add that if something like that does take place, I do think it's really important that like school voice is there, because I do think that, you know, a lot of what we talked about last week was like kind of where we are seeing shortfalls and where we are seeing those massive gaps, and we know that they exist because of just the way things are right now. And so school staff and school voice who are there like boots on the ground every day will be really beneficial in that conversation, because we can explain like realistically what things are like and how things need to shift in order to really make them, you know, work in the high schools.
And Patrice, and you're talking about, and you're responding to Eugenia's and
No.
your work.
Just like that conversation about like if we're looking at like where missteps are and where we can like where the gaps exist, like if we're doing some sort of assessment on that I think it's really important to have school staff be a part of that, because we can really speak. Like I think that all of us last week were pretty like open and transparent about where the massive gaps exist within restorative justice and where we would like to see those grow. And so I think that would just be an incredibly valuable voice to have at the table.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that we have already talked a lot about like what is needed. So I'm like, think that we have to move forward into where do we get the funding to actually invest into this work. A lot of that I think should be the direction of it, and to start changing policy too, because there is a lot of policy that contradicts this work and doesn't allow, you know, even shifting roles and making roles more restorative, more proactive, less punitive, all that. And all that has been shared in the space a lot last week. So more than investing a lot of like, you know, in like finding like or doing a lot of into what it's going, I think that the start like, you know, following what needs to happen, I think would be better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the role of this committee, right? There are two things, right? Is the policy component and the budget component. And so that's what's going to come out of here. I think oftentimes what's helpful and what I've seen and in my experience is that policy and practice, you know, there's always a gap. And I think that, you know, that's why it's important to have the active practitioners who are doing this work to inform and support the policy recommendations and language, right? So that we don't have people who don't know what they're talking about informing the policy, right? It is important that when we complete our work and you know, write the policy, that is it's really close to how we're going to help support the practice of the work day to day. But by December, it's going to be important for this committee to have identified the policy language and a budget recommendation for the full board. And so, but these, I think the conversations around restorative justice have been so important because it really has solidified sort of our direction on where we need to go. And so, I just, is there anything, anybody else wanna, I've been, Bryn?
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted, I'm echoing, I think, what you're saying and what others are saying, and that if we do allow time on the 19th, I believe that's our next meeting, right? I can do math here, in 2 weeks, for, you know, all the amazing restorative justice experts that we have on this group to give us, you know, give the ad hoc that summary of what other districts have done and what research shows is effective, and especially focusing on policy and budget, since that's the focus of this committee. I think that would be really helpful. And then, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Bryn. And I think that just brings us to, if you, as we are moving through this, if you have policy recommendations, just send them to us, and we'll include that as part of our conversation in the next couple meetings. We'll bring that to the full committee, so we can have a discussion about what was sent to us.
Hey, Gloria.
Yeah.
I emailed a policy recommendation last week, but I don't know if it got sent out to the full group.
Yeah, thanks, Bianca. We did get that. And we're holding on to that along with the other policy recommendations. And we're gonna bring that to the full committee when we start finalizing and talking about the recommendations. So that'll be part of our conversation within the next couple meetings. And it would be at that time that we'll share it to the entire committee. Anybody else? I'm just scrolling through here.
I wanted to add something from a classroom teacher perspective, that I just want to make certain that as we work towards this, you know, beautiful work of restorative justice, that curriculum violence, everything from what is coming down from the district in terms of standardized testing, new programs that are being written for all subject areas, and how that comes down into the classroom is crucial, because we know that for restorative justice that, you know, all these things matter. History matters, race matters, justice matters, and language matters. And so if all of these, like, you know, systems are working, you know, independent of restorative justice, then in the classroom, like, my thinking is that the paradigm shift is going to be really challenging. So I'm just really, you know, focused on what curriculum and instruction looks like as it relates to restorative justice, and hope that when we think about, like, how we're training teachers, or once we get into, like, this work, that, you know, not only are teachers, you know, or do teachers need to, you know, be about unlearning racist ideas, but also the district has to be firmly committed in, you know, just like eliminating any of the racist and biases and all the things that are in the curriculum that is coming down from and adopted from the district into our schools.
Yeah,
Just to
Vera,
echo,
yep,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
just to echo those points that Vera was making. That's right. When we talk about the proactive piece, that's what that looks like, is like stepping into the classroom. And so when we think about who's at that table, we need to start identifying some classroom teachers who understand that and who are implementing that, and bring them into that conversation as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that classroom perspective. It was silent there for a while. I felt like it was like a mic drop. Thank you for that. Anybody else? I'm scrolling. Karen?
what I appreciated, Vera, thanks for connecting that as well to the instructional piece and Marcus classroom. When I read the Oakland plan and I was just pretty impressed with it. It's pretty comprehensive and it ties a lot of things together so they're not siloed, so that they're all interconnected. And so that's what spoke to me when I read it and I saw it. And that's something that, you know, this team and other district and community working together on a 3 to 5 year plan, like what's the plan to start bringing this together and getting it to the classroom so that the classroom teacher, the educator will see how the curriculum I'm choosing, the materials I'm choosing, you know, my relationships I'm developing, how they're all interconnected. So the Oakland plan and how they laid it out, it just seemed like they really pieced it out in a way that is doable. And I felt like, let's get going on this. I also saw and read about repurposing existing things, like don't add on, but really think about what currently exists and repurpose it. So when we're thinking about funding, it's not just additional, but it's also repurposing. So thinking about, you know, culture and climate teams, what's the makeup of that and what is their focus? And then also, you know, we have behavior education assistants, responders, you know, how are we looking at those in a different way to repurpose kind of the roles and responsibility of staff in the building. So I feel like that was important for me to hear, because as I'm working with various groups, I'd like to see what we currently are spending on certain things and what can be repurposed to actually get at a very comprehensive plan. And Vera, one other thing that I just want to point out that I appreciate what you lifted was even some language that could be in policy about, you know, some of the curricular choices, the racial, like what as a teacher, what I am teaching matters and how I'm teaching it matters. So just, I don't know, it just feels like you have some really good ideas around what could be in policy around accountability, especially in the classroom, what we are responsible for. So thank you.
Gloria?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to connect this to something we talked about on Monday in terms of adopting a new literacy curriculum and how important engagement is at the early level too, you know, as we're talking about trying to improve literacy rates, especially for Black students, and what that means for later down the line is that it be culturally relevant in the way we teach and really honing in on improving our practices for classroom engagement at the early level.
Thank you, Savion. Wayne?
Yeah, I was going to just ask about, I mean, the examples that we're looking at, the 2 plans with Oakland and Denver, they've been in effect for a while. I'm just wondering in terms of data, what they're actually seeing in terms of a reduction in the numbers of discipline and the disparities between out-of-school suspensions. That would be good data to see if we're looking at some sort of model that would sort of pattern these models for our district as well.
Great, thank you. Bryn? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. No, just yes. And this is like another, I mean, this is probably an article everyone already has 2, but this is one, there is an article on, I'm such a book person. Anyway, it is socializing schools, addressing racial disparities in discipline through restorative justice. And it is a multi-year study of Denver and highlights some of the key points for implementation, and also says the systemic implementation of restorative justice at the school and district levels, coupled with the reform of discipline policies, can play a key role in addressing disproportionality in discipline outcomes. So, I mean, the research just really, and there's 5 key points to implementation in here, and it just reinforces what everyone's been saying. So,
Is that the book that?
Yes, this is Closing the School Discipline Gap research. So, at any rate, I know we'll get to a longer presentation next time from all the RJ experts on, there's like such a wealth of, you know, research and implementation guidance out there next time. So they will touch on, you know, they can touch on a lot of this.
Great.
Then too.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. The next slide is really sort of, next part is really reflecting, and we've done that through this conversation, is really expressing how we feel moving forward before we get into the presentation for tonight. And so if anybody wants to share, I mean, I know I'm feeling a little just like I just want to move, right? I feel like a little anxious, like let's just go, let's like develop the policy language. Like Wahenia said, the resolutions and the budget, and let's just get moving. And so I'm feeling some sort of way, but I understand that this is the process, right? And it's an important component of the process for us all. And but just wanted to open it up before we move on to the presentation, if anybody wants to express how they're feeling.
Yeah, this is Vanessa. I just wanted to give an example of something that I have been participating in recently that gives me hope just around how restorative justice works and just how relationships work. I've been a part of the Black Girls Magic circles that have been happening the last month or so. And when I tell you that these girls are like super excited, super engaged, amazing. They're like, I think the grades are 4th through 7th grade. And so there's a beautiful list of Black women that are leading these circles. And so I'm part of it. And it's just been interesting to watch how they don't even know us, right? We don't know them, they don't know us, but we're building these relationships with them through having circle process virtually and being able to talk with them. I currently have a student that is in my group that is hearing impaired. And so for me, it's been cool to watch us build a relationship in a way that I've never had to really build a relationship. And to see her open, she started with her camera off, but in the last 2 sessions, her camera's been on, she's been engaging, and, you know, just seeing just how relationship building works and how it changes the atmosphere of things. So when we're talking about the proactive work and that being where the work needs to happen, that is a real thing. Like I'm literally experiencing it right now. And so I just wanted to, you know, put that as an encouragement as we're having these conversations that this work does work. And it really is an opportunity for kids to build relationships. And I think one thing that's special too about these particular circles is that there's an opportunity for girls to connect with women that look like them. And so I think there is some components here too that could be replicated and some things that are already happening that can help lead this work. It's not like we're not doing the work already. It's not like, you know, Briar Patch, Time Bank, us, YWCA, like we've been doing this work, but it hasn't been on a larger scale like it could be. But I just wanted to kind of say that to say that there's a spark there that happens, and it's a beautiful thing when you're a part of it, and to be encouraged that this is actually exciting work. If we could just put the resources, put the time, put the commitment there, I believe we'll see a drastic change.
Thank you, Vanessa, for that. Another mic drop moment. I mean, that was just amazing to share the everyday impact that this work has on our children. And sometimes we just get so stuck on, you know, policies and, you know, the intricacies of systems and infrastructure and all that stuff that we forget the real life impact that this has on our children. And so thanks for bringing that into this space. Anybody else?
I'll go. Like Vanessa, I am encouraged by the young people. I am encouraged by, you know, their hope and just their ability to be better. But, you know, in light of what's happening in our country, I am not hopeful when I think about terms of the people who will be tasked with bringing forward these policies and changing these policies. And so I'm speaking specifically like to, what's happening nationally, with the election. And, I had a friend who put on Twitter, like, ooh, Wisconsin is blue. I could breathe again. And I remember just laughing on the inside, because the kids have this thing where they say barely. And so that's what I was thinking, like, yeah, Wisconsin's barely blue. So then that causes me to question once again, because I know the people in places, people in the position to really make change for our Black and brown students aren't usually Black and brown, right? We have the awesomeness of having, a superintendent who looks like us, but we know traditionally what Madison has looked like, what Wisconsin has looked like. So while I am hopeful with young people, I'm feeling a little discouraged, because I'm feeling like it's hard. It's going to be hard for me to trust. It kind of already was, but just seeing what's happening on a national level and then taking it to our state, it's just kind of discouraging for me. So, like you, I am ready to move. I am ready to move, like literally from the state, but I am actually ready to move with actions regarding this.
Thank you, Anthony. I don't see anyone else that is in the queue here. All right. Well, thank you all for leaning in on this conversation. That was very important to have. And so now we move into our presentation for tonight, and we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to pass this to Gina. Is that correct, Karen? Yep, Gina, who will talk about our critical response teams.
Yeah, hi. I first just want to say thank you for everyone who spoke just now. I think it's extremely important to be thinking about everything that was said around restorative practices, around how people are feeling in the state of Wisconsin. I think that, it's important for me to know that it's not lost on me that everyone is really stressed out, that there's obviously a pandemic and continued racial violence and police brutality. And then on top of that, how close this election is, there's a lot to be stressed out about. So I just really appreciate for you all speaking from your hearts, and for continuing to be thinking about ways that we can move forward. So what I'll share tonight is just an overview of the work that I've been given the opportunity to do through a grant. I know there was some conversation about grants earlier, so this is another nod to the importance of grants, because we were able to get this grant and do some of a lot of the work that you all have actually been talking about. And so I'm not saying by any means that we have arrived anywhere. This is a ongoing and current process, and I think it really pairs itself well with restorative practices. And so looking forward to sharing this stuff with you all and getting some feedback on it. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gina Agulia. I have a background in school social work. I've got a background in clinical social work. I've also done a lot of work with mental health crisis management, used to work for a Journey Mental Health Center. And then I've done a lot of work building collaborative partnerships with agencies, a lot of work with our county to really support the relationship between county social workers and MMSD social workers to really have good communication practices to support our youth that are involved in multiple systems. So that being said, that's my current title, is a coordinator of cross systems and critical response. I'm also coordinating the Stop School Violence and Mental Health Training Grant, which is what we're going to talk to you about today. I'm going to focus mostly because of timing, like on the MMSD piece, but please know how important youth, families, and community partners are in this work. And, you know, we are just starting this grant and we have some time to go. And so I'm really looking forward to, you know, setting the stage for you now, and then really connecting with you all as amazing community partners so that we can do a lot of this together. We have heard an overwhelming need for adopting the restorative justice mindset and a transformative justice mindset, or an approach, especially when we are saying that we're going to be doing anti-racist work in MMSD. It's incredibly important that if that's what we're saying that we're going to do, that we're adopting this mindset and this transformative piece. And then it's also important, and I know that we've heard that we also need to implement practices that are rooted in building community, that are enhancing culture, that are assessing climate of our schools, that are really holding our schools accountable for being places that are equitable, being places that that youth and families and staff feel that are places that they are safe to be in. I guess the only other thing to say is that for this, moving into this stuff is, you know, I'm going to share with you some of the work that we've been doing around school safety to proactively support student mental health and well-being, as well as how do we immediately assess the need of students when an unsafe situation might arise, and then how do we create specific student-centered plans that focus on mental health, that focus on physical needs, and that divert youth away from the justice system, especially our Black and Brown youth that we know are just continue to be overrepresented in our justice system here in Dane County. Want to go to the next slide. I'm going to give you a pretty quick background on the path to getting this grant. So, like I said, it was the Stop School Violence and Mental Health Training Grant. We abbreviated it to just the STOP grant. Just so that you all know, and many of you do because you make up these teams in MMSD, but there are lots of teams. There's teams for problem solving, teams for enhancing culture and climate, for mobile response, leadership teams, you know, lots and lots of teams. There's also teams at the central office level that support those school-based teams. And I have been adopting this new role, have gotten a chance to be part of our critical response and safety teams. There is a lot of membership overlap there, but those teams do a lot of supporting schools, especially when situations come up that are just beyond the scope of what the school can reasonably handle, given all the other factors that come into being part of a school. And so, you know, our job is to help support and mitigate the situation. Then Act 143, I know we talked about it a bit right at the beginning of when we started coming together, but Act 143 was put into place specifically around school safety in the state of Wisconsin. One thing that it did require is that all school staff are mandated reporters around threats of school violence, which is similar to how school district people are required to report suspected child abuse or neglect. But we also know that it's incredibly important to be thinking about how reporting impacts youth, especially youth of color and families of color. And so when the Department of Justice required schools to be trained in threat assessment so that we're not the idea is not like any threat is reportable. The idea is that we really need to be thinking what is the underlying need, what needs to happen to promote safety of everybody involved. And so therefore these safety intervention and threat assessment requirements came along. And then from there, the idea was that there would be safety grants that schools could apply for, and we applied for a few. You can go to the next slide. You know, and I think what's really important that we learned is that, you know, safety is not just locks, it's not just plexiglass. You know, it is emotional safety, it's belonging, it's engagement, it's addressing and working towards dismantling those deep-rooted systems of oppression, those structures, you know, the institutional racism that exists in education, and we know that, and you know, that is part of safety. And so you know, we've learned a lot. We need to continue to unlearn a lot and then learn some more. But that, I think, has been really helpful, is just knowing that safety doesn't just end with you know, locks on doors, that it's just so much deeper. And so we applied for this grant, and it was board approved last year, and then it was extended just a couple weeks ago. So we'll be able to utilize the grant through the 2023 school year. So far, we've trained 6 high schools, and I just want to shout out to our high schools, especially La Follette. Just really worked extremely hard in this virtual learning situation that we're living in, to really take, you know, this work to heart, to really go above and beyond, to establish just a really great collaboration between central office and school staff to think about even doing like some after action reviews, thinking about like how could we do things differently in the future. We are also going to be doing trainings for middle school teams and for elementary school teams as the years continue. And like I said, it's a relatively new grant, and it's been impacted by COVID, obviously, and having to go into virtual learning. And so, you know, really wanting to be mindful about how are we rolling this out for staff, while also knowing that our staff are having to navigate a completely new way of working. Our students and our families are struggling to, you know, make sense of this new way of living. You know, we got a lot going on. So trying to roll this out in a really authentic and a way that is helpful and not just another additional thing that now people have to worry about. So, you know, that's kind of our implementation plan moving forward. You can keep going. For the sake of time, I'll just breeze through these. The importance I always want out of this slide is that when we're thinking about a critical incident, you know, it's something that can pose a substantial threat to the mental or physical safety that is significant enough to produce an acute stress response that can overwhelm the regularly affecting coping skills. So I just think that's really important for people to be thinking about. Like, this isn't just like a kid didn't put their phone away in math class. Like, these are pretty significant, you know, critical incidents that happen that are impacting our students and staff. And when it comes to threat, it's also just really important to know that there's threat, and then there's imminent threat. And I think I said this a little bit earlier, but it's really important for us to train these critical response teams to understand the difference between someone making a threat and someone posing a threat, because they're very different things. And it's important that we be really critical of how we're functioning when we're making those decisions on whether or not we need to report something. You can go to the next slide. The objective of the grant is to coordinate training for school-based teams in threat assessment, mental health crisis management, early intervention to any violence or harm in schools. It's also really important that youth understand this model. Youth play a role in this. This is definitely youth-centered and youth-focused. This is not about being punitive or and I'll get to this in a little bit, but, you know, this is an attempt to reduce any exclusionary practices. This is an evidence-based methodology for reducing things like suspension, expulsion for students, because we're really coming at the, you know, the critical incident from a mental health lens. So the goals, again, the idea is to be early intervention and prevention, diverting youth away from the criminal justice system through that early intervention, assessing need, and then developing next steps. So we know that early intervention and diversion for our youth of color who are overrepresented in the YJ, or the youth justice system, is extremely important. And then, you know, doing that early intervention as much as we can, and then assessing students based on their function and their behavior. What do they need? What do they want? What are they trying to avoid? And then creating plans that are rooted in well-being, mental health, repairing any harm that could be caused. And that's next slide. That really takes us into how this all connects to restorative practices. And so what we say to our teams and to our staff is that recovery starts when the crisis begins. The minute that there's an issue, we want to be thinking about how are we going to be supporting all the students impacted in this situation, making sure that the way that we're providing support is equitable, is culturally responsive, you know, thinking about mental health, thinking about trauma, vicarious trauma. Those are all important things to put into play when we're thinking about how we're going to be supporting long-term as well as short-term, right? We know that there's how do we support in the moment, and then how do we repair that harm? How do we provide some type of opportunity for growth, for learning, and continuing to promote that culture and climate within the buildings. I think too, it's important to remember, oh, you can go to the next slide. And, you know, I think I just threw this placeholder in here again, just to remind people that, so we're calling them school-based critical response teams, but teams have been doing this work for a long period of time. We also know our community partners have been doing this work in collaboration with us, and that we've been, this is, you know, an opportunity to just continue to work collaboratively across systems, and to be more strategic with how we understand the various systems that impact the lives of our students and our families. And this is the start to actually being intentional about how we're involving community agencies and partners, so that we're all understanding the work of our individual agencies as well as our mutual work, so that we can work together through critical incidents, keeping our youth at the center. I won't be able to share as much as I'd like, you know, with all the training that that goes along with these critical response teams around violence risk, threat assessment, suicide risk, non-suicidal self-injury, you know, as well as other types of trainings that staff receive. But you know, if you have more questions about the specific types of training, you know, please let me know. And, you know, we're continuing to work both through this grant as well as other grants that we've received from the state around threat assessment. And we're even going to be training staff through, you know, through threat assessment. There's a professor from the University of Virginia, Dr. Dewey Cornell, who has been working on a national model that is evidence-based and is, you know, working on a assessment methodology instead of a punitive methodology for acts of school violence. Next slide. So just so that you all know, there's lots of different people that make up these teams. There are, you know, people are extremely busy, and we know that if we continue to be proactive, you know, that's definitely most important. So having a, you know, a large number of support staff, some outside agencies, as well as our assistant principal or principal is all part of the team is gonna help move us forward when we need that additional level of support. Next slide. There are some requirements through the grant. We all know how busy people are, but it is important to maintain regular meeting times. Communication is really important. There is a major training component that involves a 5-step protocol, tabletop exercises, team planning, and consultation opportunities, which all come into the violence risk assessment protocol. There is this part that is collaboration. There is the collaboration component with community agencies that include mental health unit, where individuals are trained in threat assessment, as well as mental health practices, where we want to partner with our outside agencies so that when critical incidents arise, like we can maintain control of our assessment process, keeping youth and families at the center. It allows us to utilize like a request for consultation with specific like mental health officers or crisis workers who understand the processes to help us decide what type of support is needed. And so it's just really important that that for everybody that we have to interact with in case of some type of situation, that we all are on the same page in terms of what the process and protocols are, so that we can maintain that that support mindset throughout the entire critical incident. You can keep going. So the the 3 parts to critical response, and I've kind of already talked about this, but it's just extremely important that we're thinking about it in 3 ways. We're thinking about that proactive piece. So like what ways are we, or what are we doing to intervene early? How are we keeping youth out of the justice system? How are we keeping youth engaged and thriving in their own ways? And how are we setting them up to feel welcome and safe in our buildings? And then that immediate piece, so like what are we doing when we notice that a student needs additional support? How are we using evidence-based assessments to guide our understanding of what's going on for the student? And then how are we continuing to support the student and family and connect them to resources either within MMSD or in the community? And then that responsive piece is how are we responding to critical situations that could pose a threat to the safety of students or staff? How are we doing this in a way that maintains like equitable practices? It's got to promote that mutual trust between staff and students. It's got to address the way that any event can impact all people differently and assess what harm has been caused and how that's going to be repaired. So again, going through these 3 different pieces within this critical response team. And then, keep going, almost done. And then, this is, I know this is a quick and somewhat dry presentation, but I just want all of you to know that this is connected to our ideas around providing a team-based approach to safety, really thinking about safety as being larger than just physical safety, but emotional safety, knowing all that's going on in this world, just making sure that we're intervening early when we can to really support students on what's going on for them before it's getting to a point where it's unsafe for them as well as other people. This is just some connections to other teams within MMSD and as well as collaborators. This is definitely not an exhaustive list, and it represents like broader concepts than actual agencies and existing partnerships. But either way, like all of these efforts for teaming can be strengthened and nurtured and changed and shifted. And you know, we're really looking to just continue to enhance this work. And you know, I wish I had a lot more time to share with you all, but I hope that this gave you some background and some like foundation to hear about one type of methodology for supporting safety in our schools that really does like focus on mental health, focus on assessment over like punitive or exclusionary practices, and then really sets up a plan for support. And then we're looking forward to just continued collaboration with community partners, with a lot of you in this space. And yeah, I think that might be everything for now.
Thank you so much, Gina. So moving on to group reflections, affirmations, or questions from that presentation and what we've heard today. You know, if anyone has anything that jumps out, I'll just go around the horn for the whole group, if that's okay. Feel free to jump in if you want to say something immediately. All right, well, sorry to put someone on the spot, but, you know, oh, sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
I was just going to say, I think that the family piece of it, especially when it comes to the trauma and what these kids are bringing into the school that they've experienced either in the home or in the community, is so important to address and then get back to, you know, where it's coming from. And oftentimes it's coming from the home. So I was happy to hear you talk about the family piece of it, the family engagement part of it. That is so critical to help and address these kids, because those are the issues as we that are coming into this. So we can build home oftentimes, and parents may need some help too in terms of counseling. I just wanted to say that that's a very critical piece of what that process should.
Yeah, absolutely. Lori, I'll start with you. Is there anything that you wanted to reflect upon or have questions from that presentation?
I'll pass for now and maybe share at the end.
Sounds good. Patrice, how about you?
I just want to say thanks, Gina, for sharing. And one thing that I appreciated that came up was this, the intentionality of partnering with community agencies, and in particular, that partnership beginning long before there's an incident that happens, and just like how can we, you know, as school staff, focus on that collaboration and that partnership so that schools know what the community agency is working with, and then vice versa, that they know if they're working with us or they come into the schools, kind of the way that schools are operating. And so I think that proactive piece can really help, can just lend to like situations not going sideways or going in a really scary, unfortunate situation. And so anytime that we have those opportunities to like come together and communicate prior, and for both sides to kind of know the expectation is just really important. So I appreciate that that's something that's part of the focus.
Definitely. Let's go Vanessa, then Bianca, then Bryn.
I don't think I have any thoughts at this time, but thank you for the presentation, Gina.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, Bianca.
I don't think I have any questions at this time either. You can definitely come back to me.
Okay. All right. Bryn.
I'll pass too.
All right. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I know everyone is really tired and maybe nerves are a little bit fried from events this week. And so, feel free to speak up if anything comes to mind, or email something that you want sent to the whole group later on.
I have a quick question, Savion.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for Gina, I know that our team at West, we went through that document of when to call the police to the building. Are you going to explain that process to this team as well?
Yeah, we are still working on making sure that document is, we're just asking for a lot of feedback, because we're not taking that document lightly at all, and want to make sure that it is accurate and makes sense to everybody, if and when we would ever need to involve law enforcement. And so, yeah, we first sent it out to schools to get feedback on. We're sending it around to various groups of people. I know some other people here saw a very first draft of it. It's just continuing to be something that we're wanting to be really intentional about. So it's still in the works.
Wow. Straight bullshit.
Hey, Coach, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, but pretty soon I'm going to have some real serious questions. I just feel like a lot of the times when I ask really strong questions and honest questions, and questions based primarily on outreach and engagement, I just honestly think you guys don't want me to ask real questions. So I'm going to listen more, but there'll be a time when there'll be a time, and it's coming.
Okay, well, we do value your voice and perspective and your questions, so please feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Uhanya.
Thank you, Savion. I have a question. Is there any, because I'm worried about two things. One is the sustainability of and training of staff, because I feel like it's a lot towards the youth, and what's like the accountability towards the adult to be responding in an equitable and culturally responsive way, and the sustainability towards those teams, that it's not another thing, like that usually happens, add to them. And also the accountability towards the whole implementation of everything, like the evaluation, looking at it, like if that is part of the process, and how is that gonna be reviewed or checked.
Can anyone answer that, or should we add that to the tracker for Mark?
I think those are great questions. I'd be happy to, I think that we can get back to you as far as the evaluation piece goes. All of the documents, I'd be happy to send out. It's totally transparent, and but I also understand where you're coming from with this idea of how do we evaluate the how is it actually doing what it's supposed to do? What does it look like? What's the data? And so those are still things that we're gonna need to work on as we move forward with actually utilizing this process. Obviously, with virtual learning, it's been tough to do some of the work in setting up teaming structures and supports.
Fabian, I just have a question for Gina. Is it possible to send the document that you guys are working on for when the police are called to the team?
Groups of people, I'm sure. I think it's
sure. I'll speak to that. I think that is a good use of our time. I think, to be fully transparent, there are times that police will be called, and we needed to be aware that now at the high schools without the SROs, and if police are still called, what is the decision making that needs to happen before police are called. So we wanted to make sure we had a very good grounding of what needs to happen and at what point, you know, what are our decision making, what are some things that we have to contact police for, and what are some things that are discretionary. And so we wanted to make sure high schools had that, because we did see some inconsistencies around that. So I think everybody welcomed it because they wanted to know, what do you do now when police are not in school and we do need to make a call? So I think we'll talk with Savion and Gloria. I think we'd be happy to use some of this space, send it out ahead of time so you guys can look it over and then walk it through. Certainly, we are more than happy to do that and be fully transparent. We just saw that it was a need because it was, again, inconsistent understanding of when you had to call police and when you didn't have to. So, yeah, we welcome that. We just want to make sure that there's a little bit of a balance, that it's not all about contacting police, but more of the RJ work as well. So next week, we just want to make sure as we look at the agenda, how much time we're spending, but both are very much important because they do cross at times. And I feel like that's the elephant in the room right now about, you know, what is going to happen when schools come back in session. Are we going to be ready? And what is our response to support students, both on the reactive side and even more so on the preventative side? So yes, I think let's do it, and let's get it out there. Let's get people to reflect on it. I see Wayne is smart, you know, Corban, you're like, yep, let's just do it and start getting some hard discussions going.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Thanks to Corban for bringing that up, and then Karen, thank you. I think I agree with you. This is going to be critical. Absolutely, we're going to need. We've got very good, proper protocols in place, because this could be another issue of perception and the whole issue of implicit bias and all sorts of come as a result of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. So
when the policy is written about when to call the police, and we find that people are being racist, and when we find that people are being anti-Black and criminalizing our young people, and it doesn't measure up to the school's policy, which I'm sure would be quite different than the community's policy, but like what is going to happen? What is going to be the accountability for that adult that did not follow the policy and called the police on a young person for something that wasn't outlined?
And so Bianca, I don't know if I can necessarily, and we're not at a point to speak to the actual, like, what does the accountability specifically look like for that adult. But I think a big reason why I wanted to share this this work around school-based critical response teams is because if we have a really good established process in place for assessing risk and really utilizing this process to support youth instead of penalize and call the police on youth and get youth involved in the justice system, if we're really wrapping around to support the youth and then utilizing law enforcement, specifically mental health officers who are connected to Journey Mental Health as a consult, so that even if it does feel like maybe we do need to involve law enforcement, we aren't just calling police and police are showing up. We're being really intentional about when we want to maintain that control of the situation, because we are supporting our student, we're supporting our student's family, we're supporting that foundational need to keep those authentic relationships, and that law enforcement is a consult that then we can figure out next steps. And so that's a big reason. That's a hope with this work, is that once we are on the same page, that there's going to be a lot less random one-off teachers making calls to law enforcement, because law enforcement knows what what we're doing at the school-based level, and we know that law enforcement understands that we have a process for supporting our youth through threat assessment and critical response.
Yeah, but like going back to like what Bianca was asking, like all these responses, you know, towards like youth behavior are still gonna come with bias and racism. What's the accountability work that the district is doing to address it proactively, not by like trying to make sure that the critical response team is the one who comes every time a racist teacher calls them, but like how are you going to be addressing the racist behavior and creating that accountability on that front end, because it will happen.
Yeah, so we should write it into the policy recommendations that we're here to make. I think let's do it.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's something. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, well, being in a building and like being in security, being in law enforcement, number one, you can't stop a teacher from calling the police, firstly. So it really is about creating a culture, creating a community to where, right, that really is the expectation. But I'm not as hopeful that, considering how people perceived the SRO being removed from the building and all of this stuff, that's going to be easier for teachers to do. Because, you know, for some, the SRO was the safety blanket. It was kind of that, you know, it may have stopped. So to me, I think, and I'm not saying this is based in any truth or anything, but I think fear is a real thing. And I think that's something we have to contend against, because you can't stop an individual teacher from calling the police if they feel threatened or if they perceive a threat, regardless of if it is or if it isn't. But I think that this stuff that we're talking about, like Eugenia said, it has to be, number one, it definitely has to be proactive, but it has to take into consideration those people. And there's really, like, there's nothing, what can you do to a teacher who says they felt threatened and they call 911? Really nothing. So, like, I hear it, but like at the end of the day, right, as private citizens, those teachers have the right to do what they feel they need to do in that moment. So to me, it's really about how do we create the culture, the community, because even police, like everybody in the police department is not going to know how our process works, right? We'll have some key people who know what we intend to do, but you can't account for everybody on every shift knowing how we do things. So how do we, as MMSD, as individual schools, build communities that help people to understand this is how we want to respond? Because I think having little individualized teams still leaves us open for those type of incidents to happen. And so I'm not just thinking if they will happen, I'm trying to prepare myself for when they happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great point, Anthony. Mr. Milton, before I say anything, I noticed you have yourself unmuted. Is there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to go back to, I think Patrice kind of touched on it. Number one, when we're bringing in community partners, though that's a positive, I think the focus need to be on making sure that those in the building are trained first, because we could deal with the situation at hand with minimum implicit bias or racism towards students, because we know the students being in the building with the students. And I can honestly say I know at La Follette, whenever we had some very high tense situations and officers were involved, there were several staff ensuring and protecting the students and looking out for their mental health well-being, as well as making sure that there was nothing that was unfair happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want us to make sure that we keep that focus. I mean, and like, you know, Karen said, unfortunately, there are going to be some times if we got two, I mean, at La Follette, and I'm going to speak on La Follette, if we got student A coming from West or Memorial to fight student B over at La Follette, and now that we don't have the officers in the building, they can walk straight in because we do have open campuses, and they just start a fight out of the blue. There's not going to be too much implicit
or racism bias, and that when we come to break them up, 911 is going to be called by somebody ASAP, because unless you're used to that situation, and I'm a decent sized guy, Kavan, Patrice, Coach, in those situations, the teachers that are in the building are not going to respond accordingly, appropriately, and on time. And like my dad said, if you're a prize fighter and you know, the average round is 3 minutes, if you're winning, that's a good thing. But in 3 minutes, you could also get severely hurt. So I just want y'all to know it's not as easy or as simplified as some people might portray it.
Yeah. Coach or Marcus?
Okay. Coach Asai, you got it, man. Go ahead. Say what you got to say.
Nah, go ahead, Marcus. Go ahead.
I don't have anything to add. I think a lot of my thoughts have already been put into space, and I don't have anything necessarily to add to the conversation. So
people can hear me. All right. Well, I think a lot of this is just flat out bullshit. A lot of people, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but I'm just tired of pretending that a lot of people are too afraid to just admit it. This is just straight bullshit. We could use all the verbiage, all the big terms we want to use, and we want to engage in any technical sounding verbiage, but you don't know what goes on in these buildings. And, critical response, we always talk about cops not in the building, but we appropriate all these police terms. Critical response, sometimes a kid want to yoke a kid, you're going to have to grab that kid. And you could talk all the bullshit you want about it being punitive and problematic, but sometimes you got to save a kid's life, got to save a teacher's life. And we can't be so hampered up by, quite frankly, what you think you know about restorative justice, and you come in dictating everything we do in this building without asking us what happens in the building and what we have to offer, all the while invalidating what we have to offer. And I'm just tired of pretending this. After all this is over, you're basically selling to us that we should accept your philosophy, what we do in the building, that you don't work in, all the while you invalidate ours. Now, many of you do incredible work, but I'm just sick of listening to people who talk about uplifting cultures. Many of you don't even come from our culture, but many of you exist and operate within white privilege and dictating to us what a building should look like that you've never worked in. Some of you have never dealt with an oppression, but you're sitting here smugly telling us what we ought to do, and in a somewhat of a way trying to intimidate people from expressing their real opinions. This is just bullshit. And I'm sorry, but I have to say it. At the end of the day, we're talking about bringing RJ practices to a child that has been left alone and devastated at 3. So now they're 16 and 17 and 18, and we think every second they're going to want to listen to a protracted viewpoint of how they're oppressed when they want to kill somebody right now. And I'm just tired of it. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this is so disrespectful to people who actually do this work. And Bianca, I would like to sit down and talk to you because I really want to be a part of this. I respect on so many levels of what you're doing, but we know this is straight bullshit. You're trying to sell us totally, completely your philosophy of what we ought to be doing. And I just can't accept it anymore. And I'm so sick of so many people in the building that know this is bullshit, but won't say it. I'm not trying to get anybody to have my opinion, but we know this is bullshit, given the fact that we work with children who bring guns in buildings every day, who sometimes, I don't like police officers because they can't stand me, but everyone wasn't horrible, just like every Black person isn't horrible. Every woman should be making the same amount per hour as a man. But this bullshit, this blanket acceptance of this bullshit must stop.
Look, Coach, I definitely hear what you're trying to say, but I think what we're actively trying to do in a
Sabian, I'm not trying to
is,
say it. I'm not trying to say it. I had to say it because I sat back and listened to everybody.
Hey, man,
Beautiful.
Hey, Coach, go ahead.
beautifully enunciate. I heard everybody talked, and I've been listening, but at the end of the day, you're selling something, and you're telling the people that
Hey,
you're
I'm not trying to
selling.
sell anything, Coach. We're trying to work actively to change the status quo, and we're trying to collaborate with everybody.
I'm not trying to say you're selling, but you know what, Saban? You allowed everybody else to express their opinion, but you act like you have to combat me. I'm not fighting with you. The bottom line to all this is white supremacy that decides that the uplifting that in our culture ought to be siloed out to different people instead of understanding it collectively. I've just been hearing so many white people talk about what we need in our culture. You don't know what you need in our culture because before Freedom Inc. showed up, you didn't give a damn about what happened in our culture as we were in the building. Now you act like you accept this when we know damn well it's going to fall to nothing but white supremacists meandering and white supremacy owning the day. And you're going to call the police because at the end of the day, it's run by white people who have no clue about black and brown urgency, and you're still going to call the police. And by the way, skin folk don't always make you kin folk. We have to quit acting like we can uplift our culture by ourselves. It's going to take all of us together. Every aspect of Black people has to be doing this together. And I don't mean no disrespect, but I won't be disrespected either. And if you want to get mad at me and tell me not to come back, I can understand and respect that. But I'm not going to come to these meetings to hear so much outlandish bullshit that you guys act like we should just accept as if we're stupid. Now I'm going to go, Sabian, because I have a deep respect for you. You don't even know me. I have a deep respect for Gloria, but at some point, I can't hear anybody continue to invalidate us. And I know you probably muted me. I'm going to go now, but I'm tired of this bullshit.
All right. Well, Coach, we do appreciate your voice and perspective. And, sincerely, we are trying to change the status quo. And it is messy. It's not easy. Look, frankly, there's got to be some accountability measures, because if there is a cop call on a student and that necessarily wasn't in line with the procedures and standards we're trying to put in place, that's a breach of trust. That's a breach of trust to the student. Because we know what that's done. That's a breach of trust to the school community as well. And quite frankly, we do have to look out for Amy Cooper-like behavior. And that's something that we have to discuss in policy. And that's something I'm very committed to. And I think this whole committee is very committed to. And look, I hear your frustration. From my perspective, change is really messy. And sometimes the status quo is really stubborn, but I wake up every day and engage in this community because I do believe in trying to change that status quo. And I think everyone else here does as well, including you. We still want your input here, but thank you for sharing that.
Sabian, change is really messy. We know that, but bullshit is messier. For centuries, we hear a new iteration of something designed to uplift our culture. It still doesn't work unless we all try to do it together. I mean, you may not believe this, but I sincerely have the deepest respect for Freedom Inc. I just know the agency of our culture can't be attributed to one or allowed to be one aspect of Black culture. When I see so many white people talk about what's necessary in Black and brown buildings in such a almost a casual manner, as if they're dictating to people that they know nothing about, I get sick of it. So I have to bring it up. Don't pretend you have a remote ideal about the urgency of the Black culture when you don't. At the end of the day, you get to go back home white. You could talk about having a clue, but you don't have a clue. When you would get a deeper understanding, there would be more true people included in this decision making. But right now, it's bullshit.
All right, then. So
I'm a little bit confused about Freedom Inc.'s role in the conversation, as if we work within system, but or have any power decision-making wise, because to me, it's been clear that we haven't. And I think there's a difference between being a leader on a particular faction of the Black community, right? There are Black abolitionist leaders, but that doesn't mean that that's the only school of thought. It doesn't mean that it's the only ideology, and it definitely doesn't mean that we're representative of the Black community. And Freedom Inc. has actually never claimed to do that and has fought against that narrative for a long time, for almost 20 years. So yeah, we can sit down and connect more, separate out some things and talk about some potential solutions, but I don't necessarily understand what the context of Freedom Inc. in this conversation is.
That's why I want to sit down and talk to you, because I need to understand some things. And I just feel like, you know, Bianca, I just want to talk to you. I'll wait till later. I would like to do that if that's all right with you.
Yep, and we're going to move on here. I think it's really important that y'all two move on. You know, I know that, you know, I come from a Black and Puerto Rican family, but anyway, we're going to move on. It's critical that y'all two move on, talk. You know, we have a multitude of partners that work in the district, especially on restorative justice, Time Bank, YWCA, the city, but our own teams, on and on. So
we haven't changed shit in our building yet. We could talk about another thing. We talk about is a million partners, and we haven't done a damn thing in our building. Astronomical expulsions, astronomical dropout rates. So let's quit talking about all these partners that we work with and start supporting and building the culture inside the building with the people there every day. Not exclude all the partners, but let's quit giving so much so much respect to people that we bring in from the outside and start supporting that home that these children see every day. There's some great people doing great work from the outside, but as we talk about and compliment all these outside groups, we must also ask ourselves, what the hell have they really done, given the fact that our school is the most racist in the state, in a racist state. We have epic levels of failing our children in every way, and yet we talk about how many damn partners we have. I'm getting off. Peace and love to everybody. I would really love to talk to Bianca, and because I need to understand, but I can't accept any bullshit, and I'm not according that to anybody else, but we come to these meetings and we're too damn afraid to talk. And those young girls and boys, those future leaders, they want us to be able to ask these real questions just as much as anybody else thinks that they're speaking for them.
All right. So we're going to move on to policies and to practice and homework. You know, thanks everybody for sticking with us through the comments and reflections. You know, I guess, you know, the only thing I can say is you can respect raw honesty from someone's perspective. So homework for this meeting was review current policy 4147 and come back with thoughts. Some key questions that we had was, how can this policy support and reflect restorative justice philosophies and equitable school safety and climate? What standards we want to have in place to hold ourselves accountable? What needs to be revised, added, taken out? So please continue to think about these things as you review policy 4147 and send them to us, at which point we will share policy shared with us to the whole group as we move this process along. All right, next slide, please. All right, so here's what we have for policy 4147 right now. The physical well-being of every student, visitor, and employee will be a primary consideration in every school activity, including the designing of facilities, the planning of school functions, the establishment of emergency preparedness plans, or the performance of a task. All employees of the Madison Metropolitan School District must accept responsibility for the safety of all students and of each other in the conduct of their duties. So just reviewing this right now, I know that there are a lot of things I'd like to add and revise to these. And I think something that was said earlier was how important it is that we get the real practitioners to add this language, because ultimately, you know, they're the ones in our buildings every day. All right, next slide. So I think, you know, again, I think all of us are about ready for action in terms of how we're going to go about changing the status quo and what recommendations we collectively want to make as a committee. So we'll continue to send out documents to you all. Real quick, is there anything that someone else would like to add on what we just reviewed in terms of policy?
I do want to add, I feel like this has been said several times by Coach Assad, by other people, but that we create policy, but there's a ton of accountability for young people breaking policies, right? There's a ton of accountability for young people getting in fights, for young people causing harm, for young people showing up late, for young people getting bad, quote unquote, bad grades, but there is no accountability for adults that cause harm. And I think that is an important dynamic that needs to change within the district. Young people deserve power, and young people deserve to hold adults accountable for causing them harm. And that includes calling the police on them or kicking them out of class or whatever the issue is. Young people need equal say in what the accountability policies will look like and how they can hold authoritative figures accountable for harming them, as much as teachers and other school personnel can hold them accountable for causing harm.
Thank you so much. Ultimately, we serve students and children for the community, and that's a really critical point to make. Going back to the earlier conversation, having these protocols, procedures, whatever, in terms of when we choose to involve police, if something's broken, that's a breach of trust, and that's a traumatic situation for a child, and there needs to be some mechanisms of accountability for, that Amy Cooper-like behavior. So thank you for that. And that's something that we should continue to chew on and hopefully move into policy and resource allocation in our recommendations. So. All right. So, and this is a question I tried to come up with, trying to be as holistic as possible, but really guiding us is how can the district be more proactive in promoting healthy student behavior, restorative justice philosophies, and equitable school safety and climate? I think we've all acknowledged this, but there are elements of policing that are just inherently reactive and ultimately only managing problems or exacerbating problems from adults or students. And so how can we be proactive and move the needle on issues, especially, as Wayne brought up, moving the needle on suspensions, detentions, and expulsions or out of class referrals too. With the conversation we had on Monday night, we're trying to move forward a new literacy curriculum. And a big part of that is, how do we get students to engage in these education settings in these classrooms, and what aren't we doing to provide incentives for engagement for our students? And it starts at an early level. It has to start at an early level because then we'll see improvement as people progress through our education system. But we're talking about SROs in high schools, or the absence thereof in our high schools, and what can we do to improve engagement for our students? What do we have to do to change our school climate to make it more anti-racist, less racist? So, and actually promote the health and well-being of Black and Brown students, especially in students with disabilities. So, okay, next slide. All right, next meeting, November 22nd. Hopefully we'll have some closure by then, after this week. So Bryn, you had a great idea. Would you like to bring that up? I'm sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, you're fine. Yeah, just repeating, I think the group consensus to have a more in-depth summary of what's out there as far as lessons to be learned from other districts and research about successful or elements of successful implementation of RJ in schools. So I think if we hold time for that, then that'll give the community partners and MMSD staff enough time to, pull together a nice summary of what's out there. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds right. I think that's something we can add.
Thanks.
We absolutely have to do to uplift and cultivate the talents of our in-school staff But it really does take a community to raise a child or destroy a child. So, we don't educate children in a vacuum. All right. Our children learn things outside our formal school walls. And so we really have to involve the whole community here. No one is educated in a vacuum. We're all learning in dynamic environments, and we have to take that in consideration. So, and again, we're getting to the meat of things, toward action, budget and policy recommendations. Policy is important, but budget, we got to put our money where our mouth is. It's really interesting to hear how important grants were to districts like Minnesota or districts like Denver, and how in Gina's presentation we talked about grant work and something that we can be proactive in searching for, grants to apply for, and then what we can do with our own budget. Referendum passed on Tuesday. So more things to think about. You all have Mark's email, my email, Gloria's email. If anything comes to mind throughout the next 2 weeks, please contact us. Other than that, thank you for sticking with us through tonight. Wasn't always easy. A lot of things going on in the backdrop, but I can't thank you enough for sticking with us.
I just want to say thank you, Savion, for facilitating. I think it's like appreciated just having like a person to kind of push us through all of this. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Savion.
A motion to adjourn, Savion, or I'm not sure if you were finished.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So may I get a motion to adjourn? And yeah, truth got to be heard. So yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So can I get a motion to adjourn?
Seconded.
All right. Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah. All right. Everyone say aye or raise your hand, whatever. Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Take care of the closure.
Thank you.